Hi everyone, today is Thursday, March 9, 2017. My name is Brian McInerney. I'm the hydrologist for the National Weather Service in Salt Lake City, Utah. This is the March long version of the Utah Hydrologic Briefing that's going to cover all the different conditions and talk about temperature, precip, snow, water supply conditions, peak flows, and maybe where we are in the drought. So what do you say we get to it? Soil moisture conditions as of March 1st. And this isn't above or below. What this indicates are inches to saturation. And that Kelly green color that we see north of the Great Salt Lake in Box Elder County valleys and Cache valleys indicate that these areas are near saturation, if not saturated. The rest of the areas that you see red are mountain areas, meaning it's frozen. We shouldn't have saturated soils in the mountains at this time. But I brought this up just to show you how those two areas have experienced field flooding, basement flooding to the tune of 200 to 300 basements have been flooded with road damage and all sorts of infrastructure in the agricultural areas of Box Elder County, and to a lesser extent the Cache Valley, and even some areas in Weber County. So let's take a look at the precip anomaly. When you look at December, we'll start off. Most of the state had 150 to 200% average precipitation, with some areas 2 to 300%. But really, where it counts in the mountains, that's the area we see here, doing quite well. 150 to 200% in the mountains, 2 to 300% in some areas, and this is just how you want to start things off. January got even better, 2 to 300% precipitation in January in the mountains. Again, most of Utah had 2 to 3 times the normal amount of storm activity and precip during January. And then February happened, and we see northern Utah still doing really quite well. 2 to 300% up in the Bear, with some of the areas a little south of there at 150 to 200%, but really central and southern Utah not nearly as good as what you see up north. When we look at the mountains, this is the picture it paints. Some areas of southwestern Utah doing better, but central, southern Utah, not so much. The Uintas and the Wasatch are doing quite well still. And then you see Colorado kind of dried out during this time. So when you look at temperature anomalies, let's start with December. December was about a degree to 3 degrees cooler than average, which is fabulous for Utah, and we'll take that. Most of the Pacific Northwest was cooler than normal. Parts of Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota still also cold. When you move into January, things got even colder compared to average, which is great. The western U.S. is cold, the eastern U.S. is warmer than average, and this was a flip-flop from what we've seen for the past 5 years on the whole. The western U.S. has been warmer than average really for the past 5 years. But then February occurred, and from the 1st through the 13th, we warmed up roughly 15 degrees above average for the first half of the month. What this did was melted snow at the lower snow elevations where we measure snow to the tune of about 3 inches of snow water equivalent. And we also put down 1 inch to 2 inches, some areas up to 3 inches of precipitation. And these were the two combinations of temperature and precipitation that caused widespread flooding in Box Elder and a lesser extent in the Cache Valley, and some flooding in the Weber. It's mostly fields, county roads, and basements in those areas. But nonetheless, 15 degrees above average for temperatures in the first half of February. We're going from one extreme to another when we look at precip and temperature. When we look at Salt Lake City Airport, starting on the 3rd through the 10th, temperatures were dramatically hotter, and we even hit 23 degrees above average on the 9th during this time. When we look at Snowpack for March, and that's the numbers I just pulled off on March 9th, when we look at the average of the Bear River Drainage Group, we look at the y-axis, that's snow water equivalent. The x-axis is time. The red is 2011. 2005 is the teal. 2017, this year, is the green, and average is that blue line. And you see we're at 172% of median above where we were in 2011. Very, very large aerial extent of snowpack, doing really well, big. Weber, 161% above 2011, above 2005. Six Creeks at 154% of median, really right on target where 2011 was during this time. Utah Lake Drainage, 173%. Moving over into the Duchesne, 182%, and we're coming up on the peak of what they saw in 2005 and in 2011. Now, we'll talk about the weather here in a bit, but all of these are doing incredibly well. We look at the green above Fontenelle. This is in Wyoming, 187% of median. Lake Powell, this are the snow-tell stations in the basins in Colorado as they come into Utah at 136%. And then the severe, things are kind of tapering off, and you can see the effect of that February lack of precipitation. When we say 136% of median, you know, this would have been fabulous 5 years ago because we had 5 years of consecutive below average. Now we say they're the low man at 136%. That's okay. The Virgin at 156% of median and nothing near 2005 and still below 2011. So now let's take a look at the water supply forecast by the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center that's also part of the National Weather Service and in the same room here with me right now. And we'll look at a couple of points for each drainage to give you a flavor for how things go. And we'll start with the Bear, and what we're going to look at is Bear at Woodruff Narrows Reservoir. The y-axis is volume of water in thousands of acre feet. Time is on the bottom. The reference is basically the minimum is the bottom dash line, the maximum, the top dash line. The median and average are kind of in the middle, with median on the bottom. Averages always seem to be a little higher just due to the outliers, that you get those big years. And then you see where the model is, the range of possibilities on this. The red line, the vertical red line for January was the first official forecast the River Forecast Center made, with the middle point, kind of that square, being the 50th percentile, and then you go up, and that's basically the 25th percentile, and then all the way up to the top, which means you got about a 10% chance of getting there on the first forecast. And all of the forecasts we're going to see, this trend is going up, and currently we anticipate 215,000 acre feet, or 178% of average, for the Bear at Woodruff Narrows Reservoir. Bear near Montpelier at Stewart Dam, 305% of average, very good, at the top of Bear Lake. Also, that's a different kind of forecast. It's unregulated as opposed to regulated. We'll move down into the Weber River drainage, and we'll look at Weber near Oakley, 139%, 164,000 acre feet. The East Canyon Reservoir inflow, 156% of average at 42,000 acre feet. And then when you look at the inflow into Pineview, and this is the reservoir that's just east of Ogden that flows down Ogden Canyon directly into Ogden City, 235% of average, 265,000 acre feet. And they've been dumping water to the tune of 1,500 CFS per day, trying to make space in the reservoir for the spring snowmelt runoff. Haven't seen that in quite a while, which is kind of nice. Now moving over to the Six Creeks. These are the mountains just off to the east of Salt Lake County. Little Cottonwood Creek at 137% of average, 52,000 acre feet. City Creek at 112% of average, 8.6 thousand acre feet. And you see this trend of the lower elevation watersheds not showing as much runoff from April through the end of July, and that's because we're getting more rain during the meteorological winter, and especially this winter. So you see the numbers a little muted at the lower elevation watersheds. They got rain, they didn't get snow. The higher elevations got snow. It's a little unfortunate, but that's the trend that we're going to keep seeing until we start seeing rain at the higher elevations as we move through this century. Okay, so Provo Woodland, 168% of average, 168,000 acre feet. And then we move over to Spanish Fork near Castilla, 175% of average, 121,000 acre feet. Moving over to the Duchesne and parts of the Price River drainage. And we'll start with Strawberry at Soldier Springs. This is the inflow into Strawberry Reservoir, 183% of average, 130,000 acre feet. This is really a big reservoir. It's going to take a long time for this to fill, but nonetheless, good stuff. Duchesne and Tabillon, 169% of average, 183,000 acre feet. Duchesne near Duchesne at the night diversion, 173% of average. And then we move over and down into the Price River drainage to Schofield Reservoir, 190% of average, inflow into Schofield. And then Joe's Valley Reservoir inflow at 143% of average. So all good numbers here. Now let's move over to the green, and we'll look at a couple of points there. Inflow into Flaming Gorge, 231% of average at 2.2 million acre feet. exceptional, but again, that's quite a large reservoir. It's going to take some time for that to fill up. And then downstream on the Green River itself, 5 million acre feet, 169% of average, and that forecast has been going up since really early December, as all these have in fact. Now let's look at Lake Powell River drainage, and what we're looking at to start off is Cisco as it comes across the border from Colorado into Utah. 124% of average, 5.5 million acre feet, and then Lake Powell itself, 10.4 million acre feet, 145% of average. And to bring this forecast to light, Lake Powell is expected to rise 50 feet this spring with the current forecast. That's great. I think it's great. Now into the severe. Flowing north to south, starting with the headwater areas of Hatch, 98% of average at 47,000 acre feet, a little more muted. And then inflow into Paiute Reservoir near Marysvale, 105% of average of 68,000 acre feet. Now we'll move over to the Virgin, and we have 2 points there. The headwater point at the Virgin, near Virgin, at 110% of average, 64,000 acre feet. And then Littlefield at 92% of average at 60,000 acre feet. So that's what we got for water supply, and that's really quite well. Now let's look at the peak flow. What's going to happen with peak flows as forecasted in March? And understand, this forecast, there's a lot of variability, and this graph maybe seem overwhelming to start with, but this part is the reference data, meaning for each gauge you go down the list, what happened to the historic peak, the average peak, the flood flow, 2016 peak, and then when did it happen? So it gives you a bit of reference where you are on this. And then here's the actual forecast over here. And when you look at the 50th percentile, that's exceedance probability of 50%. It could go either way, but that's the flow that we anticipate on seeing. 90th percentile, you have a 90% chance of reaching that flow. 75th, 75% chance of making it to that flow. And then you look at all the way out to 10%. If it stays wet and cold, we keep getting storms, and we hit the chance of maybe 10% of that happening. Those are the flows that are possibility. So to kind of condense this graph so it's not so overwhelming, we'll look at this area right here, and this is all in either Wyoming or the Cache Valley, or even a little bit of the Weber, but all northern Utah drainages. When you look at the exceedance probability, they're all up there, and we could exceed flood stage in all of these depending on the weather that's going to shake out from really March 9th through the end of, we'll say end of May, maybe into June, the first half of June. One thing to caution you on, Logan, that's showing a 2091 CFS at the 50th percentile. We're thinking of reworking that forecast a bit. The model seems a bit high to us and the River Forecast Center hydrologists. So take that with a grain of salt, but the rest look pretty good. And you can see there's a 25% chance or maybe a 10% chance that almost all of these exceed flood stage. And that's going to be dependent on the weather. We've had extreme weather to this point. We'll see how this goes from here. So when you look at the U.S. Drought Monitor, this is what it looks like for Utah. Really quite good. There's a little strip below this Great Salt Lake that's abnormally dry, D0, but this as well. But you ask yourself, how much did we improve in the last year? And this is what it shows. Utah improves a good deal. California has improved tremendous amounts. 5 class improvements, meaning you went from D0, which is abnormally dry, to D4, which is exceptional, which they've been in for a long time, many years. California has improved to the point where they have hardly any drought left at all. Now they're trying to do flood mitigation. So there's the long version. There's my contact info. There's my email. If I can do anything for you, if you'd like some additional data, or just want to chat about the runoff, give me a call. Otherwise, that's the March version. Now we're going to do another one in April, and then we'll start sending more of these out depending on how this evolves, what's going to shake out, if we're going to see flooding, if the warm temperatures kind of knock this snowpack back. But that's where we are right now. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this, and until we speak again, we'll go from